This is an introductory project to one of the easiest and most enjoyable ways of whittling. The reason for that is that we are using the shape of our material and the grain of the wood to our advantage. Before we go deeper, all you'll need is a knife and a branch similar to this. The branch needs to have 3 ends, one for the head, one for the tail, and one for the legs. Leave some extra length for the tail, since this particular bird, the magpie, won't look right if you make the tail too short. Any kind of somewhat soft wood should work, especially if it's still a little bit moist. What I'm using here is European red pine. The first step of the process after peeling the bark off is making the head of the bird pointy. We'll start with a simple side profile and then just a simple triangular top-down profile. Now there are 2 reasons why this kind of whittling is so easy and smooth. The obvious one is that the shape of the branch is already close to the basic shape of the bird we're making. We save a lot of time by not having to remove so much excess wood. The more important reason, however, is that due to the branching, most of the cuts we need to make are going to go along the grain of the wood. The next step is creating the basic shape of the tail. We start by flattening it from above and below. This is easy to do with rough cuts like these. After that, we make the tail a little bit narrower by slimming down the sides a little bit too. Now let's get back to defining the head shape a little better. What we can do is sketch these 2 curves that mark the edge of what needs to be removed. It's best to use sweeping cuts here so that the head doesn't slim down too much towards the beak. Then let's round out all the sharp edges around the head and the neck. The next step is making the entire figure a little more symmetrical. Just try to look at your bird from different angles and fix all the bigger bumps and dents that don't belong there. Next we'll carve the beak. Here I'm defining the sides with a few sweeping cuts and then coloring the places above and below the beak that need to be removed. As more and more details are made, we'll get a better understanding of the overall proportions of the bird figure. This means that you might need to go back to a previous step for some iterations. For example, now that the beak is there, I can see that the head is still a little bit too wide. This understanding of proportions is also the reason why in this tutorial we go back and forth between different body parts instead of finishing any of them to their final shape early on. Next, we'll make everything smoother. We can make the tail smoother with these very shallow but long rough cuts. You can look at the tail from different angles and then use this coloring technique to mark areas where bumps need to be removed or where some shapes need to be amplified. This right here is just so that I can add a little bit more of an inside curve in between the top of the tail and the back. A good basic technique for making simple shapes smoother is to use very shallow push cuts that are short on outside curves and longer on inside curves. Next, we'll work on the legs. The first thing to do is to create these 2 inside curves onto the sides with a few sweeping cuts. Then we'll create this inside corner on the front with V cuts. After that, we can round the stomach area right in front of the legs using these stop cuts. More V-cuts can be used to make the top of the feet a little bit flatter, and that is the easiest to do by starting from the sides and then moving towards the center. You can then slim down the legs from behind so that they match the angle of the front of the legs better. The separation between the legs is also done mainly with V-cuts, and the same goes for the toes. What comes to the wings, I find it especially important to sketch them first. This way we can avoid most issues of asymmetry. We can define the edges of the wings with stop cuts. To create a little separation also between the wings, we can use these V-cuts that are made with the tip of the blade. Here, the easiest way is to use these push cut and pairing cut versions of the V-cut, because the supporting thumbs really help with stability. It's also good to start with very small cuts and slowly progress to bigger cuts. Same techniques can be used for rounding the edges of the created V-cut. Then, if you want, you can give the wings a little more detail by making these slightly longer cuts on the edges of the wings to create a kind of a feather pattern. Here I'm just refining the shape of the curve between the behind and the underside of the tail. Here's the result of that. This very simple feather pattern can be made on the tail with small but still easy V-cuts. V-cuts can be used not only for the top-down profile, but also for slimming down the edges of the tail feathers. Here's still one final detail that I didn't think the figure would need, but then realized that it does give some nice added definition to the face.